Hello, and welcome to the Praecepta Podcast. My name is Stephen. I'm a pianist and composer studying here at Bowling Green in my undergrad, and I'll be co-hosting season 2 of the podcast with Andy.
Hello, my name is Andy. I'm a second year master's composition student, and we're super thrilled to have Dr. Andrew Pelletier, professor of horn in the College of Musical Arts here at BGSU. Thanks for joining us, Dr. P.
My pleasure. Great to be with you.
So let's dive right into it. Our first question and little introduction is, can you tell us about your background in performing and commissioning new music, and what was your first opportunities like that?
Wow. In hindsight, it's been from day one. I was really lucky. In high school, I had a really dear friend who was a percussionist and a brilliant composer named Mark Fredericks. And Mark started writing for me way back in like sophomore, junior year in high school. A little piece for solo horn, a sonata for horn and piano, and then it kind of exploded into a concerto that we did at the senior band concert. And then into undergrad, he and I went to undergrad at the same place together. So there were still things from him. I met other composers in undergrad. So it's kind of, there's always been a part of what I do that involves working with composers and involves premiering new works. So I guess, that's a good question because I never saw them as separate things. I mean, my whole training has always been you play music. Some of it's old, some of it's new, some of it the composer's dead, some of it you get to ask the composer what they want. So I'm lucky in that regard. So it's always been there. My first thing was something from Mark, little solo horn, two movement sonata, no piano, just unaccompanied. That was like sophomore year in high school. So that's when I started.
Wow, throwbacks. Cool.
Nice, yeah. It's really funny to hear that and like contrast that with some of the piano upbringing that a lot of pianists have, where we focus so much on like Bach and Chopin, those older eras of composers. To hear a sort of fresh perspective.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
Oh no, please.
I mean, there's a certain amount of basic technique that we have to learn from the standard repertoire that we're not
Hmm.
necessarily going to learn from new pieces, especially if they're extended techniques.
Hmm.
So pedagogically, there's reason for that. And for me, pedagogically, all through high school, I was doing Mozart and Strauss and all the standard horn
Hmm.
repertoire and Gugel and Koprash etudes and Gallet. I wasn't doing anything modern. And I
Hmm.
would bring occasionally something new to my teacher, and he never wanted to hear it. We never covered it. So it was taking that basic, well rounded, well honed technique and putting it onto whatever piece of music I was playing at the time. So it was
Hmm.
kind of self driven. And like I said just earlier, it's not like I set out to do this. To me, that was just
Hmm.
the way things were. You had friends that were composers, and you played your stuff.
Hmm.
Ta-da!
That's awesome. Another one of our questions here is talking about funds for commissions. There's a big sort of wall or setback, unless you're like involved in an institution where there's lots of funds for funding new commissions for pieces. So, how have you handled uh, funding, or where has your funding for commissions come from in the past?
Well, this is the question, isn't it? I mean, this is the big challenge. So for me, it's three different ways of approaching a piece and getting a piece written. First is you start with the people you're around with every day. I mean, I have no idea why our performance students at BGSU are not constantly hounding you composers for new works. I just don't know why that's not part of our culture because that's it starts with the friend, you know?
Hmm.
You're not going to pay them anything. They need the exposure. They need to write bad pieces and figure out why they're bad. You need to learn what works on the instrument and doesn't and how to work with a composer, like how to talk to a composer in a way that's constructive and creates a new piece and not negative and tells them what they're doing is wrong. There's ways we can talk about that as a performer. So start with that, friends. So a lot of my early commissions were all freebies. They're all friends that I worked with on a regular basis, and I said, write me a piece, and then there's a piece, and so I play it. As my career went on, and I started working with more prominent composers, I was still broke. Hey! Uh, so the attack plan I took with that time in my career was telling a composer that I can't afford their full fee. I'll pay them what I can. But what I could guarantee them was I wasn't going to give them the premiere of their piece. I was going to give them the first 5 performances. I was going to take it on the road. Because let's face it, as a composer, I'm sure Andy will back me up on this one. Getting a premiere is not hard. Premieres are easy. After the premiere is hell. You know, the piece gets played, it never gets played again. So I could tell a composer, look, write me this piece. I can give you, we'll arrange some kind of payment. You should be paid something. But I'm going to take it on a tour playing at these different institutions, so a bunch of different people are going to hear it. And I got a lot of mileage with that with composers because it gives them automatic exposure as compared to the one performance and all that. And now, kind of established in the profession, the mistake we make when we're thinking about contemporary music and commissioning and paying for commission is we think there's going to be one funding source. And that's the mistake. It's several funding sources all giving you tiny amounts of money, and you put them all together and there's your commission. You know, so for like, if I was commissioning a new work today, funding from BGSU, fund on the faculty level, you know, creative funding for faculty to do research and all that kind of stuff, MACM grants, International Horn Society stuff, American Composers Forum. There's all sorts of different small things that you put together, and that becomes a commission.
Yeah,
so,
we've been working with MACM for some funding for Praecepta for our own new music festival, and the small portions is really adding up for us.
Well, that's the thing, exactly. And it's also, I remember when I first started doing this, there's a moment of almost guilt that you think, I'm double dipping. This isn't right. I shouldn't be doing this. This is exactly what you do. Or like,
right.
if you're commissioning a work for like a trio, you don't have one person in the group write a grant. All 3 write grant applications. And so you get 3 little pots of money that become one bigger pot of money. Exactly. You try to do everything you can to get as much support as you can, because it's only fair. I mean, a composer should be paid for their work. Imagine that. So you want to try to make sure that you're doing everything that you can to make sure that the composer gets the full fee that they want and they ask for, and that it's paid on a timely manner. That's oftentimes the hardest thing, is getting it paid in a timely manner. If you're doing it with several different grant applications, you have to be really cognizant of when deadlines are due, who needs reports, who don't need reports, who need copies of the first performance with the score, who don't, and then is there language that has to go into the score to fulfill the grant, all that kind of stuff. So you just have to be kind of on top of things and be good with keeping notes for yourself to know exactly what you have to do to get the money. I warn my students all the time too, is all this grant stuff, it's reimbursement money. So it doesn't come at the front end, it comes at the back end. And so there can be some issues too. If a composer wants a certain amount up front as a deposit, or if they want all of it up front, or if they want it at the end, then you have to hound them for some kind of bogus invoice with an invoice number, because no grant is just going to pay off of, oh yeah, I got the piece. They're going to want to see an invoice from the composer with all that. So it's all that little kind of frustrating paperwork stuff that we have to keep on top of that can get challenging.
Yeah, some really great things in there that I particularly like, just asking of friends. That's something that's what got me started in a lot of it, and now I'm here now. You mentioned the International Horn Society, and that's one of the things. I'm also a horn player, and that's one of the bigger organizations in the horn community. Can you talk about how that's aided in your new music playing and commissioning?
Yeah. So in terms of funding, the IHS has 2 funding opportunities. There's the Mayor Ramon Commission Assistance Fund, which is a grant that is for smaller amounts of money for a piece of music. And you literally apply for it with a narrative, who's the composer, all that kind of stuff. If the grant when the grant gets awarded, because I've never known anybody to not get a Ramon grant. Then there's some language that has to go in the score. They want a copy of the score and a copy of the first performance. And then we've just started in the last 10 years a major commission fund, where that's a pool of money that sits and grows over time until there's a big enough chunk of change to commission, say, a major concerto. The last one was James Horner's Concerto for Four Horns and Orchestra, which I cannot remember the name of it. It's not Concerto for Four Horns, but it's like the James Horner Concertstück, like the Schumann Concertstück. Beyond the funding side of it, there's also the platform side of the IHS. The first time I soloed at a symposium was in 1997, and I brought, of course, a new piece, and I've brought new pieces ever since. And it's neat that the society has always seemed to be, and regardless of the host of that particular symposium, very open to new works being performed and given at a symposium. What's really interesting is that in 97, I was one of very few horn soloists that was coming with new music. And over the years, it's just kind of, and now IHS 53, which we just had in August, I would say 90% of that program was new music and premieres. Very,
Great.
very little traditional repertoire was played.
We composers like to see that.
Well, I do think it's great. I also think it's important that the balance is the key. You always want to have a balance of stuff. That it's not just traditional music, it's not just folk music, it's not just world music, it's not just new music. We got to kind of have all of it. That's really important.
You say we because you are the president of IHS.
Former past president. Yeah, but I do think I like the fact that it's changed so much, that it's not like there's one or two soloists out there that are seen as like the new music weirdos, that we're starting to see new music for horn ensemble, just being a normal part of what we do. It's music. I mean, I think it's American Composers Forum. They have a little spot on National Public Radio where it's, remember, all music was new music, which I love. It's totally true. We forget in Mozart and Beethoven's time period, Handel, no one wanted to hear a piece of music that was written 3 months ago. Everything was new music. Everything was current. Everything was premieres. And I think the more we can get into a balance of new sounds, new ways of approaching the instrument, commissions and premieres, and the traditional repertoire, that's a healthy balance.
Yeah, balance is key.
It really is. And extremely hard at times.
Yeah. The IHS being one of the places that you've found people and other composers who you've worked with. Are there other places, we've talked about college or even high school, going that far back,
No.
or some of the other places that you've met the composers that you've worked with?
Well, I would say after high school and college. So I was away from the people that I was just surrounded by all the time and composers I saw on a regular basis. I went to the Bowdoin Summer Music Festival at Bowdoin College in Brunswick, Maine. I'm from Maine. And so I went there because they had a scholarship for Maine students to go. And I won it 2 years in a row, so I went for free. And the last week of that festival is the Charles E. Gamper Festival of Contemporary Music. And it's just an entire week of new music with the composers on site. But they've got some money. So they would bring in a raft of the names. My first year there was a roundtable discussion, and it was, let me get this right, it was Crum, Corelliano, Stephen Albright, Bright Sheng, Shinari Ung, Elliot Schwartz, Jacob Druckmann, and Ralph Shapey.
Wow.
That was
That's insane.
It was actually a great moment, because it was a 2 hour long panel discussion about composing and new music. And they're all sitting up there, and there was no prepared statements, it was just right into questions. And someone goes up to the microphone and they ask, how do you as a composer determine whether your piece is effective or not? Dead silence. They're all staring at each other, like wondering who's going to answer first, right? They're all just kind of looking at each other. And John Curigliano said, okay, well, I'll answer first. And he said, to me, it's whether the audience member feels like this is an interesting piece, I'd like to hear it again. Big fight erupts. and they fought for 2 solid hours. There was only one question asked in the whole session. It was fantastic. It was great. So, but there I got exposure to new composers and got to meet composers. While I was there, that's Bowdoin College, the doyen of Maine composers, a gentleman named Elliot Schwartz, who's now sadly passed. Actually, Elliot Schwartz was in the first New Music Festival at BGSU. He was one of the guest composers. Elliot heard me playing, liked what he heard, knew I was a Mainer, liked it even more, and so then he started doing stuff for me. Then when I went to Los Angeles, I did my master's and doctorate at the University of Southern California. I joined a group called Southwest Chamber Music, which is a chamber ensemble that specializes in new music and underplayed music. And I met composers through there, too. So it's always exposure. And part of it is, as a performer, you got to push yourself out of your shell. And we have this time where sometimes we'll be working in a piece in an ensemble with a new composer, and you like the piece, you like the composer's voice, and you think, gee, wouldn't it be great if I got a piece by this composer? And it ends with that, because you don't feel comfortable enough going to the composer and saying, I really like this work. Have you written anything for horn? Would you consider writing me something? Because we think it's being forward or too aggressive or too self-marketing, whatever you want to call it. We're just uncomfortable with it. Well, that's what you have to do. I mean, I was always inspired by Dennis Brain, great British horn soloist, died in 1957. Many major composers wrote for him in his time period. Hindemith, Benjamin Britten, Elizabeth Lutyens, I mean, a bunch of composers, big composers, only because Brain was not shy to go up to them and say, write me a piece. You should write me a piece. I would love for you to write me a piece. And then they did. So I just started doing that. I'd start up conversation. Hey, composers are people too, right? Talk to them about their music, and then befriend them, and then you should write something for me, and I'll see where the discussion goes from there. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. But I think part of it's just pushing yourself as a performer out of your comfort zone.
Yeah, I like that a lot. Those initial conversations can be hard to have, but it's always fun when someone else, like last night we just had a composers forum concert, and Stephen just played one of my pieces, and it was great success. And someone afterwards was like, hey, let's talk about this sometime, like let's figure something out. And it goes both ways. The composers reach out to performers like, hey, I'd love to write for you, and performers reach out to composers. It's an interesting dialogue to navigate.
Yeah, I mean, for me, in my own art form and what I'm trying to do on the horn as an artist, it's the holy trinity of performer, composer, audience. That all three are important. The performer has to work with the composer and interpret. The composer has to be inspired by the performer and maybe work with them. But the audience gets to be the decider if it's successful or not, and how we communicate to the audience, both as composer and performer. To me, it's that circle is super important.
I've never thought about it that way. That's really interesting. Yeah.
We tend to forget that third one. And I'm not saying you have to pander as a composer, but there is a point of, so this goes kind of to how I work with composers too. I warn young students, well, not young, but college age students all the time who are working with composers, never ever tell a composer that something's impossible on the instrument. There's more effective and less effective writing. What I tend to do is if I see something that is not playable, that doesn't work on the instrument, I won't say that doesn't work. I'll say, what's the effect? What do you want the audience to experience here? What's the aesthetic? What's the mood? What's the drama? And then knowing that, I might be able to make suggestions of the composer that's more effective on the instrument, which then means it's more effective for the audience. Because to me, we can't have that third part of the triangle missing. Like I said, it's not pandering to them, but it's trying to understand what do we want them to experience and what's going to be the most effective way of doing that. You know, even if it's something like, I want the audience to be uncomfortable. I want them to be angry at this moment. You know, I want them to feel like something impending is happening. Great, then let's figure out how to make that happen. I've done a couple. Corey Kapchick wrote a great piece for Horn and Electronic Media for me that called Chugach, inspired by the natural preserve in Alaska. And there's this build up in the middle of it that's supposed to get to like almost painful. And what it was, the electronics is he was recording a 747 as it took off. Like he was at the end of the tarmac. So you hear it coming and it just gets this overwhelming volume. And that's what he wanted. And so then there was discussion of, he had some horn stuff in there to augment that. I said, no one's going to hear this if you want that jet sound to be that tremendous. So here's what I would recommend to make the horn part more effective at this moment. Because I didn't want to take away from the jet effect, because that was cool. It was really cool. So those kind of little things of, instead of saying, well, this doesn't work, don't say that. You know, because no composer wants to hear that. A composer's job is impossible to begin with. You know, how do you take raw emotion, turn it into sound, and notate it in a way that someone who's not you conveys that emotion to an audience? Impossible! So let's work together on it. That's my approach always.
Yeah. I'm going to take another follow-up question. How, like, you're talking a lot about collaboration at this point, and that's been one of my favorite parts about the composition process. Do you have more to talk about with collaboration or specifics with specific composers?
Well, depends on the composer. I mean, some composers I've worked with, like Sam Adler, one of my favorite human beings on the planet. He's someone that it comes to you pretty much 99.9% done. It all works. It's all extremely well composed. There's no editing to be done. And if you don't know anything about Dr. Adler, he is a terrifyingly fast composer. So, like the first time he and I were chatting, he had written a little bit for solo horn in the Cantos series of solos that he has. There's a solo horn thing in there, but it had been a long time since he's written something for unaccompanied horn. And I had said that I really would love to hear what he would do with the musical material in the Grand Aleinu from the Yom Kippur afternoon service in the synagogue. And we were just chatting over coffee about this, and like 7 days later, his Cantilena for solo horn showed up at the studio. 2 movements long and brilliant. Same thing with his second horn sonata. He wrote an early horn sonata way back when he was a teenager. And I went to the premiere of the tuba concerto that he did for the Toledo Symphony with Dave Saltzman, which was a stunningly gorgeous piece. I mean, one of the best new works for a brass instrument, I think, written in the last 20 years, 30 years. And I just said, the horn world needs another sonata from you. And so sonata number 2 for horn and piano showed up 10 days later. He's like, oh, let's go out for lunch. I thought, oh, okay, we'll go out for lunch and talk about the sonata and how it's coming along. No, it was, here it is. I'm like, oh, okay. Wow. So he was someone where it was very fast and done. Howard Yermish, a composer, when I knew him, he was in Los Angeles. He's now in the Philadelphia area. He wrote 2 works for me, a solo piece and then a concerto for horn and band called Dimensions, which is one of the only fully minimalist horn concertos I know. And that was a long process because he was going for certain effects and certain colors. So it was a couple of months of meeting, talking through things, play some stuff from him, and he'd go away, he'd come back, just little tweaks here and there. And also, he really wanted me a part of that composition process because he wanted to make sure that it wasn't a piece that like I was going to play and no one else. He wanted to make sure it was a piece that a really good undergrad, a decent graduate student, and certainly any professional could play, so it could get play in the market. And I was glad to help him with that. So to me, it depends on the personality and the the process of composition for that particular composer. I let them drive the truck in terms of collaboration. I try to get a sense right off the bat of, okay, is this someone who they want to do their thing, or is this someone who wants to have some suggestion, and how early on I try to make sure my political antennae are like on full bore the first couple of times I meet with a composer to make sure I'm not stepping on their toes. Be able to make some suggestions, but then to see where they are. But I think of all the I've done a lot of commissioning. I don't want to sound like I'm bragging, but a couple of years ago I passed the 50 commission mark, which was kind of cool. Yeah, but I think of the things that I've done, the proudest thing I have is that a lot of composers have written more than one pieces for me. To me, that's like, I'm doing something right. And it's not like they wrote me a piece and it's like, I'm never writing for him again. The process was so painful and the performance was so bad. It's never going to, no, I got, most 2, 3, 4 pieces from composers, which to me says, I guess I must be doing something interesting at least. I also like it when a composer experiments with a different voice. So Chris Dietz has written 3 works for me so far. So far, Chris. Anyway, still working. There's going to be more. It started with a piece called Signal for horn and percussion, horn and 2 percussionists, and premiered at the International Horn Studies Symposium in London. And it is probably the hardest thing I've ever played. And typical for a lot of Chris's music, nothing's impossible. It's just every bar that you're looking at is the hardest thing you've ever seen. And then the next bar is the hardest thing you've seen. And then it was unbelievably difficult, but a remarkable piece. And I'm hoping to record it in the next year or 2.
Maybe that's where I get it from, Stephen.
Yeah.
Well, put this in perspective. That symposium, I was premiering that piece. I was premiering a new piece by Carrie Turner written for me of a series of theme and variations for horn and piano based on Couperin called La Badnoline, and the Ligeti Concerto.
Easy stuff. Easy stuff.
So I was chatting with Dr. Dietz in the mailroom, and I said, "Man, this thing is harder than Ligeti." And Gene Trantham was there at the time, and he turned and he said, "That needs to be on your door. Chris Dietz, harder than Ligeti." But then he turns around after that and writes a solo horn piece called Recall, which is just beautiful simplicity with some neat rhythmic activity in the middle part of it. Gorgeous, gorgeous, gorgeous piece of music. And then the most recent commission, piece for 2 horns, that was written for Bruce Bonnell, who's the horn teacher at Central Michigan University. It was written for he and I. We just finished up last year a solo duo CD of stuff we've commissioned that should be coming out like any day now. We finished editing months ago, and we're still waiting for it to come out. Anyway, called Kacha. So hunting, hunting horns, and it's canonic, so the 2 horn parts are chasing each other. And it was another one of those, it has his sound, it has his voice, but it's remarkably different than the other 2 pieces he's written. I love it when a composer starts fooling around with that kind of stuff.
Great. Wonderful.
I love that. I love hearing about, the ways that different composers work differently. It's all really fascinating because as composers, we look at that and we don't talk about our own processes enough. And so it's always really interesting to hear, like, even just asking somebody, like, how much do you normally compose in a week? And they're like, depends on the week,
And everybody's different. Every composer's different.
Yeah.
Some composers write something every day. I mean, they're just grinding the stuff out. Some write every day, but the editing process takes forever. I mean, it was shocking to me Uh, one of the last projects I did with Southwest Chamber, oh God, what was it, 2008 or 2010, something like that? 2010, I think. We premiered a piece by Roger Reynolds that he wrote for us called Positings for Chamber Ensemble and Live Electronics. And, Roger's a name, he's an important composer. And we had a whole week of working with him. And I thought for sure, because the part was really demanding, very rhythmically demanding, the ensemble stuff was very challenging. And I thought, oh, he's going to be spending, loads of time with us because he's an electronic music specialist, right? He knows what he wants out of electronics. The guy created sound patches and stuff for Boulez and Earcom, so he knows what he's doing, right? All of the rehearsal time was spent with the live electronics. I mean, he was just tweaking that all the time. And I didn't think about this, but for him, that was the biggest variable based on the acoustic of where we were premiering it. So once we got into the space, he was always like, oh, that doesn't work here. We need to move that speaker. We need to change this patch. It was tweaking that stuff and almost nothing with us, the live players. So that was an interesting experience to see how that changed for him. I also thought it was interesting that he didn't want to run the live electronics. He wanted to be free to be objective and not be involved in the art of performing at that time. So he had someone he really trusted running the live electronics while he just listened, which I thought was really fascinating. It showed to me that there's like two parts of his brain as composer versus performer, which I found interesting. So that's what I appreciate, that every composer is a different animal, different human being, different psyche, different approach to the art form. And I like to just experience what they want to do and then see how what I do fits into what they want to do.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. It's always interesting, or it has been at least, to see how a big thing like a pandemic comes along and changes how everybody works. We were going to ask about, like, yeah, how is this whole big thing affected? It certainly affects performances. It takes out almost the whole audience part of the Trinity.
Yeah.
It can change other things. Yeah.
Oh, absolutely. And some of us performing, what's that? Oh, I used to do that. There are many of us, well, I'll just speak for myself, that are not totally crazed about virtual performing or even streaming. I'll be honest, I'm not a big fan of streaming concerts because to me, a concert needs to be a time that is not a time and a space that is not a space. It's magic. We're experiencing something right now that's only happening here, that only us in this room get to experience, and the energy in the air changes at this moment. And for me, once you put that camera in there, it's different. And especially if you put that camera in there and no one else is in the hall, then it's like, oh, great. It's like playing a jury. Well, here's an interesting pandemic thing. I commission one of the things I do at BG is whenever I have a student in the studio who's a composer, Andy will back me on this, I'm immediately on their butt. Write a piece for me, write a piece for the Horn Club, give us stuff, give me scores. So the first time I heard anything that Corey Broduck wrote, I was like, holy smokes. I mean, there's a voice. There's a fully formed composer's voice. And so I commissioned him to write a piece for horn choir. And he wrote a piece called There Will Come Soft Rains, which is, did I get the title right?
That
yes!
Familiar.
I got the title right. Which is, I think, the most passionately beautiful piece of new music for horn choir that I've heard in 30 years. Wrote it in 2019. It's stunningly beautiful. But it requires extended techniques that one cannot do if you are socially distancing. There's a little technique he does where players sitting next to each other, the person to the right inverts their horn, so the bells are almost touching.
Interesting.
The bells are facing each other. And them playing against each other without the hands in the bell creates standing waves in the air, and the air shimmers. It's this astonishing effect. that was used in a horn choir piece written in the 60s once on the last chord, but Corey makes wide use of it throughout the piece. So Horn Club was preparing to premiere it. Had it ready to go, and we were going to be premiering it the first week of April 2020.
Yeah.
So that concert got canceled. Then into the
No.
fall, no Horn Club because we were all online. Then into the spring, we're back and playing with masks and stuff, but you can't put the bells next to each other because we need, 12 feet between each other. So spring, it's off. I was going to do it this semester. So I'm hoping it will get premiered 2 years after the writing of it.
Jeez.
So there's a classic example of where it's difficult. Um, it's been hard. I mean, a lot of composers aren't, well, I would say a lot. Some of the composers I work with regularly are just not writing very much because they're like, there's no performances lined up. So there's that. I'm depressed as heck. So I don't feel like writing anything because who knows if there's even going to be an art form in 3 years. Now, that darkness has crept into what we do as artists of, well, enjoy it now. We won't be doing this much longer. So this is where the piece I'm playing at the New Music Festival next week by Corey, I commissioned a work from him at the height of the lockdown, where I wanted him I said, put the stress and anxiety of isolation into a piece of music. And he wrote this piece, Autolalia, for solo horn, meaning the art of speaking to oneself. So it's fascinating, because a typical Corey, he wanted to do something really intriguing. 7 soliloquies, and he wanted the variability in performance to not just be interpretation or rhythm or tone, but structure. So it's 7 soliloquies, and the only thing he's adamant about is number 4 is always in the number 4 spot. You can move them all wherever you want. So there's like 720 different varieties of playing this one piece. And it's the amazing thing is, and I've played works that kind of do this, but with Corey's, it is a vastly different experience emotionally for the audience when you change the movements around. And I've made a point every time I've done it, because he put it into the International Horn Society composition contest, so I had to record it for that. I did a video recording of it for IHS 53, which was over this past summer, which was all online. So we did a video recording of it. But I did a different order of movements to feel how it was different. And when I do it next week, I'm doing a different order of movements again from how I've done it before,
Cool.
which is, it's a blessing and a curse. The blessing is it's really interesting. The curse is I'm terrified to make a recording of it, like a professional, like a CD,
Yeah.
because then it fixes it.
Mm-hmm.
It was almost like I told Corey, I wish almost like I could do really excellent studio recordings of each soliloquy, and it lives like on a website. And you like click on the movements in which order you
Randomly.
want, then hit play, and then it plays it that way. Because I'm just afraid the second that I fix it, horn players are going to hear it in that order and want to experience it in that order when that's just one possible way of presenting the piece. But brilliant piece. So I think the biggest issue for me, feeling responsible and feeling ethical with commissions, is it's really hard to say I want to commission a work and here's where I'm going to do it. It's been near to impossible to do that. In fact, I was telling Andy before we started, I've been working on Dr. Lilios for a horn piece for now like 15 or 16 years, and she's writing one. And I could say I want to do it at the International Horn Society Symposium in Texas this summer. So there's a date and a time and a location. But that's like my first solo engagement that's not on campus in the books for this year is next August. And this is the issue that we're dealing with. So, I mean, I am so happy for Dr. Adler. He's got a big premiere right now with the Detroit Symphony this weekend. The Symphony 7's getting played up there. And this is one of those where it was, are they going to play it? Is the orchestra back? Is it going to be, what's going to happen? And it's going to happen. So that was a terrifying thing for him for a while. So it's hard. I what's it like for you? Either of you, Andy? I mean, do you have commissions lined up, or is it like everybody's like, well, I don't know?
I was student teaching when the pandemic hit, and it was student teaching was hard for me already, and when everything went down, I also kind of went down, and like I didn't write anything new from like the middle of February to when I started here in August. I went like
Yeah,
the whole
and
time.
yeah, and I can imagine, and there's no guilt attached with this. I can imagine there's a part of your consciousness was like, why bother?
Yeah.
No one's going to be playing this. Not everybody's going to be Charles Ives and writing pieces that then go onto the cabinet and never get played until right before he dies, right? Just writing to write. Yeah, it's really hard. Yeah. So, Stephen, how about you? I mean,
Definitely.
are you working with
Yeah.
composers right now, or?
Yeah, I mean, we've already talked about Andy's piece that was able to get premiered last night. Um, but yeah, I feel the same way as a performer. There's tons of pieces that I've found. The whole being in isolation has given me a lot of time to research composers, like whose works that I really want to get more out there. And yeah, it's like I'm teeming with like repertoire and program ideas, and it's all just a matter of when are the performances going to happen and where, certainly.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, when and
Mhm.
where.
Yeah.
I can also,
After
yeah.
after your recital, Dr. P, Stephen found an interest in Ruth Gibbs.
Ah,
Yeah, I found her biography. I've been looking for her piano solo or ensemble pieces, of which their scores are very rare in the US.
yeah,
Uh,
yeah.
but yeah, luckily you see a lot of her ensemble pieces, or the horn sonatina is in a lot
Well,
of different
yeah. Well,
libraries.
she, as you know, because you looked at her bio, she had that little ensemble in England that she ran, which is like a
Mhm.
nonnet or something. So there's a lot of little chamber works that she wrote. She wrote a big
Yeah.
concerto, which is fiendishly hard, and she wrote it for brain. Um, and it's interesting because, to be honest, so my recitals always have a unifying factor. I always because to me that keep the audience part of that trinity. It's
Mhm.
an audience can grasp onto a recital easier, I find, to get more out of it if there's a framework for them to grab onto. It's not just, oh, I like this piece and oh, I like that piece. I want to give them something that they can contextualize what's going on. And for me, the Gips was kind of like, oh, it's a pleasant piece. It's very 1950s England, quartal, quintal harmony, that kind of stuff, very pleasant. Um, I don't think by any stretch of the imagination it's a huge, profound work. I mean, the fact that she calls it a sonatina tells you right there it's not profound. It's a little miniature. But I never once thought the audience was going to respond to it like they have, which is hilarious to me because both Dr. Yontov and I were like, yeah, the Gips is fun, it's nice, but it's not the Musgrave. I mean, that's a great piece, and everybody has gone nuts for the Gips. I'm like, okay, and like the piece, to be honest, that I was like chomping at the bit to play the whole time was the Musgrave, which I think is a absolutely brilliant piece of music and does not get played
Yep.
nearly enough.
Which was also delightful to be a completely fair. Yeah.
Love that piece. I just love her music. It's so visceral and dark and angry and atmospheric. Andy, I don't know if you've listened to the horn concerto that she wrote for Barry.
Yeah.
Oh my God, what an unbelievable piece of music. And just so virile and powerful. And her stuff, no, hardly, well, because it's hard. It
It's
hardly ever
really
gets
hard.
played. It's really, really, really hard. Rachel Bull is our DMA horn student. She's working on The Golden Echo, which
Okay.
first big major piece for horn electronic media, Musgrave from 85, 86. And it's fiendishly hard. It's also fiendishly hard in that it's fixed media,
Hmm.
and there's lots of moments where Musgrave does the whole this must align here, this must align here, and you've got like a little smattering of notes and an alignment, and then a boatload of notes and an alignment, and then way even more notes, and you're like, and it's not like the same amount of space between each event. And Rachel said, "How how do I learn this? I said, well, for me, it's a threefold process. One, you learn all the notes in the horn part, away from the electronics, away from any concerns of tempo. Get them in your ears so you can sing them. You know where you're going, you can hear them. Then, for me with fixed media, I live with the fixed media. Like, it's in the car and it's the only thing I listen to. Seriously, because I need to be able to, in my bones, know when the next event's happening without counting anything, no stopwatch. I can feel it because I know it so well. I did the U.S. premiere of Stockhausen's last piece for horn electronic media, Nibelung, which is 28 minutes long, all from memory, and it's the same kind of thing where each cell of music, which is a full staff, is not the same length of time. And at the end of each cell, there's a spoken incantation on the fixed media that you have to line up with every single time. So everything's variable. And I literally, the fixed media was on a CD in my car, and I listened to it everywhere I drove for 6 months. It just had to get in my bones. So it's learn the notes, get the electronic media in your bones, and then put them together. Because it's just, but Musgrave's stuff is fantastic.
Yeah. We don't have incredibly much time left, but we wanted to talk a little bit about your recording. You do a lot of recording, but it seems like just as much as a challenge as funding to do recording. Can you talk about some of your recording projects you've done with composers and new musicians?
Yeah. Well, there's ones that I've done as a solo artist. There's only two, actually. I've done very little solo recording. I've done a lot of ensemble recording and small chamber stuff, Southwest Chamber, LA Brass Quintet, Modern Brass Quintet. My solo stuff, I was very lucky. The first one is a CD of all the music of Randall Faust, who's a composer and horn player in Illinois. And there was some stuff on that recording that Dr. Faust wrote for me. So it was stuff that hadn't been recorded before or brand new works that had never been recorded before. And the recording company that we got it recorded through, MSR CDs, at that time, they had a grant agency that they worked through in New York City that would fund CD projects if it was of an up-and-coming unrecorded artist playing new music. That was my first solo CD. It was all stuff Randy had never recorded. So that was a free CD. The Charles Schwartz Foundation paid for the whole thing. So, nice. Yay, that was fun.
Solid,
now, the one that I just have coming out now, any day now, that was a good example of kind of many things put together. So it's myself and Bruce Bonnell. So it was recorded up at Central Michigan University. Central Michigan has grants for their faculty to make recordings, so Bruce got that grant. We also got money from the IHS for the premieres because the Katja by Chris Dietz is on that. David Gillingham wrote a piece for two horn and piano for us called Timepiece, and then we do two other duets that are not new, well, 20th century, but not new to us on that recording. And I got some MACA money, there's some BGSU money in there, so there's a lot of others, all stuff put together. So it's just like commissioning. It's sometimes piecemeal, it has to deal with who you're commissioning from, who you're recording, where you're recording it. You know, all those sorts of things all come together to give you a funding pot. It's the hardest thing. It is the hardest thing. And I live I won't lie, I live very cheaply throughout the year so that I can have a pot of money at the end of the year if I want a commission from a composer that I'm not maybe going to get grant money for, or a composer who's just profoundly expensive. And there are some composers I've commissioned from that were astonishingly expensive. But I pay it because I want them to write me something. So I've done a good seven or eight commissions that were fully funded by me, just paid out of my pocket.
Wow.
No support. But there were things that I thought were important and that I wanted to do, so cough up the change.
Yeah.
And there are times I've talked to the composer and said, look, can we do some kind of payment plan? Can I do it in installments so that it's not just one big lump, check it? And they say, oh, of course, no problem. So that's a way of going about it.
Yeah,
Great.
that's good. I'm curious to hear when you are making a recording or planning it out, how you're to again bring up the trinity of composer, audience, and performer. How does the audience aspect change when you're preparing a recording?
Oh, that's a great thing. What unites the album is there's something that I want to give people who are buying recordings of me an experience that they're not going to get somewhere else, just like in a recital. So that's why I've never like recorded the Mozart concerti or the Strauss concerti or any of the big standard repertoire, because there are loads of recordings of players better than me playing them. So go listen to them. Go listen to Dennis Brain play it. Um, so to me, it's partly what am I presenting to them? What's going to make it interesting for them? So for like Dr. Faust, for Randy's CD, that was just presenting all music of Randy Faust and in different orchestrations. It wasn't just all horn and piano. There was horn and harpsichord, well, natural horn and harpsichord, horn electronic media, horn and organ, horn and piano, solo horn, all in that one disc. The two horn disc with Bruce Bonnell, it's more about making that, because when we were working on the program notes, of course, there's an initial push to make them scholarly, and here's where this piece came from, and here's this composer's bio. And I said to Bruce, let's make it as personal as possible. Why this composer? Why this piece? How do we know David Gillingham? How do we know Chris Dietz? Where did the piece come from? Why did they write it for us? So that when the audience is reading this, they're feeling they're in a personal moment. It's not just some CD. They're kind of involved in this. They're understanding the story behind it, and it becomes something interesting. So for me, it's orchestration, it's composers involved, it's the story behind a performance or a recording, why this recording, what makes it personal and interesting. You know what I mean?
Hmm. Yeah, that makes sense. That's really good.
Wonderful.
Well, it's just that there's so much out there.
Yeah.
And I don't think we have to, as performers, resort to kitsch and schlocky things that hold it together. I think modern society, more than anything else, wants something personal. They want something real. They want to feel like they're knowing someone, right?
Yeah.
And so you got to open up your soul and share a part of yourself with them and the storyline of where that piece came from. I think that's when an audience relates to you, because then it's not just like if I was doing a recital, a performance of, well, let's say a two horn thing, I wouldn't just say this is music for two horn with my friend Bruce Bonnell. It's going to be more, here's how I know Bruce, here's how we met, this is why this is interesting. We felt like we were cut from the same cloth, we're going to grow up together, blah, 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 all this kind of interesting stuff. And you go, oh, that's cool. And then, hopefully, you actually hear that in our playing, too.
Yeah.
That particular recording, what was so fun for us is that Bruce and I did not grow up together. We have no shared tutelage whatsoever. But we approach the instrument almost identically, and we sound very similar on completely different equipment.
Interesting.
The concept
Fun,
is the same.
fun.
And
Yeah.
the first time we worked together, we were like, "Where have you been all this time? You're my long lost brother." And actually, we named the album "About Time" because everybody said, beyond the fact that one piece is called Timepiece, one's called Time and Space, all that kind of stuff. But all of our friends said, it's about time you guys record something together because you sound
Funny.
like your best buddies. So it's that kind of, these
Um,
little personal things, I think makes it interesting. That's my approach, at least.
Yeah. Great thoughts, great everything. It's been a joy to have you here, and it's been great. Do you have any final thoughts or things you want to promote?
Well, just especially because this is Praecepta, any of our students that are watching this and listening to this, just get out of your comfort zone. Talk to performers if you're a composer that you enjoy. If you hear a performer who's really engaging and you like what they do, talk to them about writing a piece for them and make them part of the process. If you're a performer and you hear a composer whose stuff is interesting to you, talk to them, work with them. Because the truth is, you composers desperately need performances and want performances, and where do you get them, right? And we performers, it can be a stimulating thing for us to not just be playing music of dead people, but to actually be part of the process and understand how a piece comes about. Because guess what? Working with a composer and figuring out how a piece gets created can oftentimes change the way you look at the standard repertoire, too. And then the standard repertoire seems alive to you as a performer and not just a dead old piece. So, push of all the places I've been, this is a glorious institution for this. And I love how strong and vibrant our composition area is in the College of Musical Arts. I adore Macam. I adore the New Music Festival. And I wish we just made it even more of an interweaving of all those different elements of MUSP and MUCT all the time. Because guess what? They both start with M. They both start with music. Right? At
There
the end
you
of the day,
go.
it's all music.
There you go. Thank you so much again,
My
Dr. P, for
pleasure.
being here. And
Great.
thank you, everybody who's listening. Be sure to tune in for the next Praecepta podcast coming to you soon. Take care, y'all.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
See you.